The new channel. The new channel. Hashtag TNC Now.
The views, opinions, and insights expressed in the following shows are those of the host, producers, guests, and viewers. They do not necessarily reflect the position of the channel. Viewer discretion is advised.
Hello and welcome to the new channel. Our passion transforms a community that sees all things new. I am Alpha Sanford and I'm streaming live from Boston, Massachusetts. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, mabuhay. You are watching Once a Teacher, Always a Teacher, Season 2. Hi, good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us again on this beautiful day. All right, folks, today's episode is really about the social emotional learning and the mental health of our students and how we are supporting them. Today's guest is an expert when it comes to the school mental health and supporting our students' social emotional learning. Let me actually introduce to you our guest for today. John Crocker has worked in public education for over a decade, primarily as the administrator for the Methuen Public Schools Counseling Department. He has overseen the planning and implementation of the Mental Health Initiative, which has focused on the establishment of a comprehensive school mental health system in partnership with the National Center for School Mental Health. John has worked with the NCSMH as a member of the National School Mental Health Task Force and as the Massachusetts team leader for the National Coalition for the State Advancement of School Mental Health. In his role as the Director of School Mental Health and Behavioral Sciences, he is charged with overseeing the district-wide implementation and evaluation of the Methuen Public Schools CSMHS and positive behavioral interventions or supports, also known as PBIS. His work focused on developing a district-wide system of universal mental health screening, advancing the use of psychosocial data to inform school mental health staffs and their practice around therapeutic supports, and the development and evaluation of the CSMHS in Methuen. He has worked to scale up evidence-based therapeutic services across Methuen through the provision of district-wide professional development and the design and implementation of group and individual therapy programs. Mr. John Crocker also founded the Massachusetts School Health Consortium, MASMHC, which is a group of approximately 150 school districts across the Commonwealth of Massachusetts who are committed to advocating for and implementing quality and sustainable school mental health services and supports. Most recently, MASMHS co-led the Massachusetts Collaborative for Improvement and Innovation Network, also known as COIN, for Comprehensive School Mental Health and Thriving Minds, which is a professional development series focused on building comprehensive school mental health systems. He received the National Center for School Health's School Mental Health Champion Award in 2018 and was nominated in 2019 Massachusetts School Counselors Association Administrator of the Year. He also received the 2021 Massachusetts Parent Teacher Association, or the PTA, Counselor of the Year, and most recently, the 2021 Massachusetts Interscholastic Athletic Association, or the MIAA, Michael J. Kane Wellness Award recipient. So, our guest today is the expert when it comes to the social, emotional, and mental health of our student. So, let's bring him in, Mr. John Crocker.
Hey, Alpha. So good to see you.
Same here. How are you today, John?
Doing well, doing well. The year's starting off well. We're implementing all kinds of supports for kids. It's great to see students back in school, and I think we're realizing that this is, hopefully a year where we can get back to a little bit of normalcy. We're feeling it with our kids and our staff that we're getting back to rituals and routines that feel familiar. So it's been a good start to the year.
That's wonderful. So our topic for today is all about the students' SEL, or the social emotional learning, for those who are not really familiar with the acronyms, and mental health. But before we go into this direction, how would you define the SEL and the school mental health?
Yeah, certainly related on the same continuum. When I think of social emotional learning, I think of explicitly teaching knowledge, skills, and fostering, specific attitudes for our students that will help to guard against the onset of more serious mental health problems. So these are skills that every student needs: relationship building skills, social awareness, self-awareness, how to navigate their social environment, resolve conflict, how to ultimately seek out help if they're overwhelmed, or how to navigate problems within their community, within their school. So when I think social emotional learning, I think it's tier one in a multi-tiered system of support for social emotional learning and mental health. Mental health services and supports are focusing on addressing specific concerns that students bring to the table, maybe anxiety, depression, post-traumatic stress, substance use problems. So certainly, SEL, it serves to prevent, it serves to promote mental well-being, and mental health services and supports are the slightly more intensive supports that are offered to a subset of students, perhaps in group or individual services that address a specific problem and help students to build, again, skills so that they do not need to persist in therapy. The goal is for that to be a time limited experience, and that we ready them up so they can go it alone.
Great. Thank you for clarifying those two definitions, John. In my mind, it's tough to put it in the layman's terms sometimes, but the way that I heard it from you is that SEL is almost like the tier one. And then when it comes to the mental health, we go to tier three, and you name about anxiety, depression, all of the things that are going on in the students' mental health lives, correct?
That's right. And I think it's also the case that, we're talking about everyone promotes SEL. Everyone is contributing to explicitly teaching social emotional learning. And when it comes to mental health services and supports, we're really looking to our school mental health staff. So our school counselors, adjustment counselors, social workers, school psychologists to be able to deliver those interventions. And those are evidence-based therapeutic modalities, evidence-based counseling theories driving those interventions. I wouldn't expect for a classroom teacher to engage in therapy, but I certainly would expect a classroom teacher to maybe use some of the framework from,
Mhm.
for example, cognitive behavioral therapy to be able to support students in the classroom. I think one of the classic examples is I ask teachers all the time in different professional development opportunities, have you ever asked a student who was anxious about a test, like, try out the first two problems, see how it goes, and then come back and tell me how it feels? And they go off and they do the first two problems, and they come back and report out and they say, well, you know what, that was okay. I think I'm going to continue with the test. Great. That's wonderful. That's a behavioral experiment. That's a cognitive behavioral therapy technique. And I think teachers, we need to give a lot of credit. They do this all the time. They just don't label it that way. So it's certainly okay for us to use some of these frameworks, some of these therapeutic modalities, and inform practice in the classroom, because it's incredibly effective.
Great. Thank you for clarifying that even further. John, I'm curious, was there ever a moment in your life as the director of school mental health and behavioral sciences when you realized school mental health is definitely a priority?
I mean, I got into this field knowing that, um, you know, youth mental health was an incredible priority already.
Mm-hmm.
I recognized, in my early work with students, that the majority of problems that they were coming to the table with didn't center around things. I mean, certainly academic problems and wanting help navigating the post secondary space, but the vast majority of things that students were coming to the table needing help with centered around social emotional learning, centered around mental health topics, how to, incredible amounts of anxiety and depression and trauma. And I think I looked at the space that we were providing services in, and I realized that, this isn't a problem for one or two people to
Mm.
be able to address in a school of 2,000. This really needs to be all hands on deck. It's also the case that, increasingly, I think we started to recognize that, when we invest in mental health, when we invest in social emotional learning, we're investing in all of the other outcomes that we care about. So it's not the other way around. Like, do academics a lot and mental health improves. It's that's just not the way. That's not the order of operations. We
Mm-hmm.
have to invest in mental health and social emotional learning first, and that mediates the outcomes, like academic outcomes and post-secondary outcomes, that we care about deeply. I also need to say, like, mental health is good because it's good. I need no other reason to promote it. But it is um, it is really the thing to invest in that mediates every other outcome for schools.
Mhm. My gosh, John, what you just said is very important. I think, based from what I'm observing across the Commonwealth, there seems to still have a distinction between focusing more on the academic of the students versus the social, emotional, and mental health of the student. But what you said is very important. Let's invest first and prioritize SEL and mental health. And you could not have said it louder. I'm hoping that everybody was able to hear that. So everybody will truly understand the priority and the urgent need for SEL and supporting the mental health of our students. Yeah. So, John, from your many years of practice in this field, what is happening across the state that are best practices when it comes to both the SEL and also the school mental health support for our students?
Increasingly, we're seeing that districts are investing in comprehensive school mental health systems
Right.
and really developing systems of support. And if I'm going to define that, it's really another tiered system of support, but it's not just about the services. We would expect to see services like social emotional learning and mental health literacy at tier one. At tiers 2 and 3, we would expect to see things like group therapy, individual therapy, wraparound services, programmatic services like bridge programs out of using the Bright model out of
Right.
Brookline Center. So those are the services I would see within a comprehensive school mental health system. But MTSS is so much more than services. We have to talk about school mental health teams, and are those teams orienting to the right kinds of priorities by investing in needs assessment and resource mapping? Do they know what they have? Do they know what they need to get? Are they aware of their human and material resources? I also think that there has to be a tremendous amount of data systems development within schools, universal mental health screening that promotes referral, progress monitoring, teams that look at data to make referrals, so referral systems. All of these things matter in a comprehensive school mental health system. And it's not the case that you can do any one thing in isolation and expect it to produce a tremendous amount of change. So I see districts investing in comprehensive school mental health. I love that. The state has done a great job of developing opportunities for districts to get involved. You mentioned in the intro the Collaborative for Improvement Innovation Network for Comprehensive School Mental Health. That was an opportunity for districts to be able to go through a process of really generating change and trying to develop comprehensive school mental health systems with support from the Massachusetts School Mental Health Consortium, the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education, and really an experience facilitated by the National Center for School Mental Health. There are also a ton of grant opportunities and academies that the state is putting on around SEL, mental health, PBIS. So districts that are looking for professional development and looking for resources, they're out there. You can access them. One of the pieces that I see is really promising across the state is investment in universal mental health screening. I think that is a piece that we've certainly taken seriously over the past 8 years and have developed a system where we're screening students K-12 multiple times a year using measures that focus on anxiety, depression, trauma, substance use, general mood. And the goal here is prevention. There, when I think of schools, schools are the prevention arm of the mental health system writ large. And if we don't invest in screening, then we wait for two things: diagnosis and crisis. And that's a pretty terrible public health model. So if we invest in practices like screening, we get to find emerging concerns, get ahead of problems, and be able to provide an opportunity for early services and support. So, comprehensive school mental health is, in general, universal screening. I see increasingly an investment in evidence-based therapeutic practices, investment in clinical leadership, people hiring a lot more counselors too, which is wonderful. I think that has been a great priority. The one thing I'll say is that, it's not just about adding counselors; it's about using them correctly. And if you've got a staffing model that perhaps does not position your staff to provide these services and supports effectively, then adding more is not going to really do anything. So that is a call out that clinical leadership in schools is one of the most important things that we need to invest in, so that we can train, sustain the feedback and supervision for these staff members and position them well to provide services.
John, can you talk more in terms of how to best use the talents of our clinical folks?
Absolutely. I mean, if we're going to be real about this, we've got master's level clinicians embedded in schools across the state already. One of the problems is that sometimes we just don't use these staff members well. And it's not that we are intentionally not using them well. I think that sometimes it's just the case that, I'll use the example of maybe an associate principal, a wonderful person who's trying their best to supervise and evaluate mental health staff, but maybe just doesn't have the background to be able to do that effectively. I often use the example of, I think I'd probably be a pretty terrible department chair for a science department. And that's not because I don't like science. I love science, but do I have the pedagogical skill to be able to move practice in the science department? Probably not. Am
Mhm.
I Do I have the skill to be a clinical supervisor and to design systems of support? Well, yeah. So I think one of the problems is that districts don't have leadership that can really turn on the services and supports, leverage those staff effectively, position them well to provide those services, get them the professional development that they need to be able to continue the work, resource them effectively, provide feedback and supervision that will move practice. That's missing in a lot of districts. And I think that at the end of the day, that means that services and supports end up maybe getting implemented, and maybe not,
Mhm.
unfortunately. So I think a heavy investment in really understanding what these clinicians can do is important. Um, you know, Evidence-based therapeutic practice can happen in schools, and our school-based mental health staff absolutely can provide that to students. That is an opportunity to massively increase the available services for students. But I think it means that they need the appropriate ongoing professional development and supervision and resources. And in order to do that effectively, I think we need to invest in leadership to be able to do that effectively.
That's great. That's wonderful, John. Earlier, you mentioned about mental health literacy. Can you tell more? What is that all about, and how should that look like in the schools?
I see mental health literacy happening in a lot of health curriculum where we're talking about, what what constitutes mental health. How do we even define that?
Hmm.
We talk about physical health an awful lot, but what is
Right.
mental health?
Right.
What is anxiety? What is depression? How do I, what constitutes self care? Why should I
Mhm.
care about stress in my life? Why should I care about risk factors and protective factors? So I think it's about arming students with knowledge around how to take care of themselves, how to seek out help if they're recognizing in themselves that maybe something's happening that they require help to address. I think it's also about empowering students to notice in others when they perhaps need help, and to speak up and to find ways to support other individuals. I think topics like suicide come up in mental health literacy, which is incredibly important. I need to call out that suicide continues to be one of the leading causes of death for our youth. And if we don't help students to understand ways in which they can get help if they are experiencing suicidal ideation, then I think that's a massively missed opportunity, unfortunately. Um, I would call mental health literacy one of the tier one approaches, that it's
Mhm.
good for every kid, and we should provide time and space to be able to teach about mental health and how students can take care of themselves and how they can notice in themselves things that perhaps need to be addressed. Um, so yeah, I would say that an investment well made, because it's going to
Mhm.
prevent the onset of more serious problems if students know when to get help early.
Yeah, that's wonderful. I hope that in the next few years, we will be able to see, especially in the secondary levels, a dedicated time and even a content area specific to the mental health literacy. It's
Mhm.
good for everybody.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. So looking at the entire school mental health crisis that's happening in the state of Massachusetts, do you have any data in terms of that?
We do. We have screened students for, like I said, about 8 years at this point,
Hmm.
and we screened through the pandemic as well.
Oh,
We are,
wow.
we
Okay.
are, so we had data before, we had data afterwards. And what we noticed when we compared our data sets between years is that we're seeing 2 to 3 times greater prevalence of anxiety, depression, trauma, um, which means that it simply overwhelmed the mental health system. And I'm sure that people have heard of the stories of students that are boarding in hospitals for weeks
Hmm.
or months,
Hmm.
um, outside therapeutic services being completely and totally overwhelmed to the point where there are 18-month or 2-year wait lists. schools dealing with crisis at a rate that they just simply had never had to before. So the data is pointing at a huge increase in prevalence. We have continued to screen over the past couple of years and have embedded those measures within our strategic plan so that we can double down on the services and supports that we offered pre-pandemic. A lot of times people will ask, like, well, what are you doing differently after
Mm.
the pandemic with mental health? And really, my answer is nothing. We're continuing to do the same things that we did before the pandemic. We're just doing them at a higher frequency. So for universal screening, we're doing that more often and for more topics. For
Mhm.
our evidence-based therapeutic programming, we're offering more services, more groups, more individual services, hiring more staff. And we're offering social emotional learning in a more explicit way and using a cognitive theory based curriculum for all students. So it's really not the case that it's all that different. We're just doing
Mm.
it a lot more in relation to, or really as a function of, that 2 to 3 times greater prevalence of students needing care. If I'm using the data that I would say is our baseline after the pandemic,
Mhm.
we were seeing about 30 to 35% of students with moderate to severe symptoms of anxiety, depression, or
Mhm.
post-traumatic stress at the high school level.
Wow.
And that trend of 2 to 3 times greater prevalence held true with our students in grades 5 through 8 as well.
Wow. And John, is this all because of the pandemic, or is this like a cumulative emotions and feelings that our children are seeing because of social media, peer pressure, and all of that?
Yeah, my stance would be that it's never any one thing. Um,
Okay.
the pandemic is certainly a contributing factor. It's also the case that, sure, social media is a thing, and social media does contribute to the anxiety that students experience. It's a never-ending feedback loop for students
Mhm.
that is tough to process. I think it's also the case that we've seen an incredible amount of social unrest and political
Mhm.
turmoil and
Sure.
social issues that are impacting students in a very real way.
Mm.
So I think that all of these things contribute to the well-being or the mental health problems that students experience on a day-to-day basis. If we really take the stance that it's not any one thing, it's all the things, and we have to be really nimble to address multiple impacting factors. I think that's going to be a better outcome for students than simply saying, "Oh, well, it's just social media. Take that away,
Mm.
and they'll be fine." That's
Mm.
just not the case. There are plenty of other risk factors that are contributing to mental well-being.
Great. Thanks, John. Now, let's just say, for example, I am a small school that hasn't really prioritized supporting students' SEL and the students' mental health well being. How will you help us develop a school wide or maybe even a district wide support system, comprehensive school mental health system? How will that look like? Will you walk us through?
Yeah, when I work with other districts to kind of set them on the right path toward a comprehensive school mental health system, I think that there are a couple key foundational ingredients. Teaming
Mm.
is one of them. This is
Mm.
this
Okay.
standing up this a comprehensive school mental health system means you need administrative support, you need clinical support, you need insight from teachers and from
Mhm.
students and from families, from outside agencies. So getting a multidisciplinary team in place to be able to have those perspectives that will inform the creation of that system is incredibly important.
Mhm.
After that, I think, needs assessment and resource mapping is going to be critical. So
Mhm.
having that team really perform a review of what do we have, what do we need, what does our staffing model look like, what services are we currently providing, what data do we have to really inform our action planning. Once you've conducted a needs assessment, and I would recommend the shape system as one of
Mhm.
the most important needs assessments that will really inform a district's understanding of their school mental health system, kind of the state of their school mental health system. Once that's conducted, that will inform the creation of an action plan that people can feel that people will feel good about and that will be informed by data. Once that action plan has been developed, I think it's not about implementing everything all at once. I think that action plan should be comprised of steps that one can take that will maybe be steps toward expanding something that's going really well. So like find those opportunities to double down on something that is already going well and that you can
Mhm.
expand and scale up. And then high priority areas of need that maybe need to be focused on. But the implementation of those things, you can't do that overnight, and you can't do that across the entire school or district overnight. I'm going to use universal mental health screening as an example. Maybe a school or district says, that's our priority. We want to make sure that universal screening happens. Well, what would happen if you screened 2,000 kids tomorrow and
Mhm.
did not have the appropriate follow up um, procedures in place? You didn't have the right kinds of staff who could follow up with students. You didn't have the policies and procedures in place to inform your response to crises that may occur as a function of screening. So, I would say take a continuous quality improvement approach to your implementation. Start small, small tests of change that lead to larger tests of change over time. I often tell districts that want to screen, again, keeping with this example, screen one student using one measure, one day.
Mhm.
Small test of change. You're going to learn a ton about screening by screening just one student. You'll have to navigate consent procedures and selection of the measure and scoring it and housing the data somewhere and using it to inform your practice. What would I do with this data for 10 kids, 50 kids?
Mhm.
So it's that small and manageable test of change that can inform your scale up of implementation. So we've talked teaming, needs assessment, resource mapping, action planning, and then I would say data systems are incredibly important to get going so that you can understand who needs help and for what. And um, once you're there, the options open up quite a bit in terms of what you can do. Um, I would say a heavy investment in professional development for your school mental health staff is important, focusing on evidence-based therapeutic modalities, on data collection, on measurement-based care practices. And then for teaching staff, really investing a ton of professional development in social emotional learning, trauma-informed practices for the classroom, SEL instructional practices as well, because there's a difference between SEL curriculum and SEL instructional practices. Both are great.
Mhm.
SEL instructional practices can be implemented really overnight, and can be implemented in any setting.
Mhm.
So it's less about the content changing, and it's more about your pedagogical approach changing to foster social emotional competence. So I would say those are some kind of key first steps to getting a district moving in the right direction.
That's great, John. While I was listening to you, I'm like reflecting in terms of what we have done in our school district. And you're right, it wasn't overnight. I look back and we began the work on social emotional learning in 2019. And this is a huge shout out to Kim Dwayne, who's been leading the work on our SEL and supporting our school mental health across the district. But yeah, we were lucky enough, but when Kim and I started to have a collaborative partnership with the Hingham Public Schools, and that's when we started to really look at what Hingham Public Schools were doing and how we can actually start it with a very limited budget in Randall Public Schools, and from there through partnerships and professional development. At the time, the Renee Center has some SEL cohorts, so we brought a group of our SEL task force committee to the professional development that Renee Center has provided. And then now, exactly what you are saying, John, I am seeing the expansion of our SEL and school mental health. In fact, recently we just hired a clinical psychologist, which before, we would not thought of, but we are seeing the need for a certain staff member to be with us. So thank you for, in my mind, I was like, okay, check, 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 check. Are we doing what John is telling us? So, what else are we missing?
No, I'm super familiar with your implementation. I know how hard you and Kim are working, and it shows. It's incredible to see your district moving in the direction that it is. So kudos to you.
Yeah, thank you. We have been very lucky with really great social workers, school adjustment counselors who have really been with us throughout. So, yeah, shout out to our wonderful social workers and SACs. All right, John, let's see. What if I am a new teacher and all of these school mental health jargon, practices, curriculum are all new to me? What do you think should I prioritize in order for me to start getting into the rhythm of SEL and supporting the mental health of my students?
Yeah, that's a great question, because we have so many new staff members this
Mm-hmm.
year, last year, and it can be incredibly overwhelming to try and focus on content, focus on my instructional practice, orient to the new needs that are in front of me, this new culture that I've been dropped in. So I think I have a couple suggestions that I think people can move on pretty quickly. One of them would be, you're going to be delivering content, right? So why not
Mm-hmm.
make sure that your delivery of content is also going to foster social emotional competence? So why not use SEL instructional practices to be able to do both of those things well? And one of the ways in which we do that is I'll offer the Castle 3 Signature Practices Playbook as an example of a set of practices that can really drive your instruction, and it doesn't change your content. It's just helping students to build social emotional competence because you have changed the method of delivery of your content.
Mm-hmm.
Facing History and Ourselves has a wonderful set of teaching strategies that are in the same vein, SEL instructional practices that change how you deliver content, but don't really change the content itself. So you're really investing in social emotional competence for your kids, but you're also doing the thing that I think as a new teacher you really want to try and do well, which is focus on your content and do that in a way that feels effective. The second piece would be, our students have experienced a tremendous amount of trauma, and they do not come with a case history attached to them. You will not know which students have experienced trauma and which haven't. So the goal is create a trauma sensitive environment that allows for you to support all students who have experienced trauma without knowing their trauma history. So
Mm-hmm.
there is a set of practices and standards that we've developed that draw from evidence-based trauma practices, and it's called the Methuen Public Schools Trauma Sensitive Classroom Strategy Guide. Quick Google search will yield that for you, and I think the idea behind it is it really paints a picture of what a trauma sensitive classroom looks like, and the
Mm-hmm.
practices that you can implement to be able to establish that. There is a self-assessment associated with each of the standards that classroom teachers can really use to understand whether or not they're implementing that standard of a trauma-sensitive classroom. And it's a free guide. We just want to put it out into the world and make sure that people feel armed well to be able to support kids.
Wonderful. John, we'll take a few minutes of break, but when we come back, can you share with us your perspective? What's happening nationwide when it comes to the school mental health and the crisis that is evident right now? So, all right, folks, we'll see you in a few minutes.
Hi, this is Rene Sagaran, pioneer member and choreographer of the Maneuvers and creator of Hataw Fitness. I would like to invite everyone to please support our fundraising event entitled The Crossroads Dance Movers for the Love 90s Dance Concert. This will be on October 8th, Saturday, 5 p.m. at the Crossroads Center. Part of the proceeds of this event will go to Jeffrey Carmelo C. De Castro. For inquiries, please try to directly message me on my Facebook.
Juan Lu and his puppets face to face with special guests Makata Tawanan, Jess Box, and the Lunaria Marionette Show.
Salita. Alam mo, Tito Ando, kung wala ako, magsasalita ka mag-isa. Kung wala ako, wala kang masusuot. Kung wala ako, wala kang nakakain.
November 13, Sunday, 7 p.m. at the La Verdad Auditorium in Apalit, Pampanga. Buy your tickets now and see you soon, face to face.
The new channel is an online alternative new media platform of online shows for people on the go. Please watch all our shows as seen on screen. Imagine having your own show, your own playlist, your own content, but we make it easier for you. TNC aims to transform the lives of our viewers through engaging, authentic, and original content. Our channel is a responsible global 24/7 platform that showcases Filipino talent, global influencers, cultural intelligence, and ingenuity. Please continue to support Once a Teacher, Always a Teacher on selected Saturdays at 10:30 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. You can watch live or on replay via Facebook or YouTube. You can also follow us on IG, listen to us on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Just search hashtag TNC Now. For sponsorships, please email now@thenewchannel.com or send us a DM. Enjoy these life-changing shows because we made them for you. All right, folks, welcome back. Let's bring in our guest, Mr. John Crocker, back here. All right. Hey, John, welcome back.
Thanks, Alpha.
Thanks. All right. So let's talk about this nationwide crisis on school mental health. Why is this happening, and why is this issue very important?
I mean, we talked a little bit about how there are, I would say that there are a lot of contributing factors to the youth mental health crisis. Um, I appreciate for sure the Surgeon General's report that was recently drafted and sent out that really calls to light the youth mental health crisis and is really a call to action for everyone to contribute in whatever way they can to ensuring that students get the support that they need. In terms of what we're seeing huge increases in prevalence of anxiety, depression, post-traumatic stress, substance use. We're seeing that students are disengaged from school, unfortunately, that the ability to attend school was greatly impacted. Certainly that was the case last year. I'm seeing markers that indicate a movement toward a better situation this year, but we have a long way to go. When I look at school attendance rates, and we really put that under a microscope, we're seeing that continues to be a huge problem. So
Mhm.
so it's a lot of contributing factors to the youth mental health crisis. And when I think about what needs to be done to address that nationally, we still have a shortage of mental health staff
That's right.
that needs to be addressed. It is the case that in some communities, the access to mental health services and supports is impacted because there are no local agencies. Rural areas in our state experience that increasingly. Telehealth is part of a solution, but it's also not a perfect solution. And we simply don't have enough people to be able to provide the services and supports that are requisite with the youth mental health crisis. 2 to 3 times greater rates. And if we're going to be honest about this, there was a shortage of mental health staff before the pandemic. This was a
Mhm.
problem before things really started to increase. So there simply has to be an investment in the
Mhm.
workforce, in the leadership that will ultimately position that workforce well. I also see problems related to funding streams, things
Mhm.
like Medicaid reimbursement being something that's really difficult for schools to navigate, and and inherent problems to Medicaid reimbursement for schools, things like the wrong pockets problem, where the money doesn't go directly to the school, it goes to the city or town, and then there's an agreement that needs to be struck between the city or town and the school department about where
Mhm.
that money actually goes.
Mhm.
And then we have a ton of problems around licensure
Mhm.
and role confusion that need to be addressed. I think a heavy investment in leveraging all school-based mental health staff is necessary if we're going to address really the emergency that is the youth mental health crisis. Um, I think that taking the time and energy to being able to lift up the field, and that means more professional development, more training, more opportunities for resourcing, and more people that are directly invested in this work. It's a start, but at the end of the day, uh, districts will need to develop comprehensive systems of support if we're going to address this youth mental health crisis. The last thing I'll say relative to this question is we need to be better about prevention. Uh, we're
Mhm.
we are not a we are not a we're a pretty reactive field. Unfortunately, we wait
Mhm.
for, again, diagnosis and crisis before we start to really invest in services and supports. But if we do things like universal screening really well, then we can start to find emerging concerns. If we do social emotional learning really well, then we can start to invest in preventative opportunities to build skill so that students do not experience more severe mental health problems.
Thank you, John. We do have a long way to go when it comes to SEL and the youth mental health. Now, when it comes to equity, do you see the intersection of equity and social and emotional learning needs of our students?
Absolutely. I think that if you don't center equity in this work, then our students simply do not, it is not as an effective model as
Mhm.
it could be. When I think of mental health services and supports and equity, I think of the degree to which districts are thinking about how how all of our students are accessing those services.
Mhm.
One of the things that I really want to be sensitive to is looking at disproportionality data around access to services, looking at
Right.
this disproportionality data relative to which of our students access screening. All of
Right.
these things matter, and if there is a difference between, for example, I'll use, if I'm looking at data and I'm seeing that there is a disproportionate number of Hispanic students that are not accessing our universal screening, that
Mhm.
prompts me and my team to say, well, why is that? And that
Mhm.
sets us on a course to figure out how we can better create or better redesign our screening system to ensure that all of our students are accessing that system equitably. It's not the case that we can build these systems and expect that they are just going to work perfectly for all of our students. We have to be sensitive to the fact that different cultures and different populations of students will experience our systems differently, and we need to accommodate. We need to account for that, and we need to build those systems durably, such that all students are accessing them, and that they are linguistically and culturally appropriate services that we're offering. I'll use screening as another example. If
Mhm.
you build your screening system and you are only screening in English, that is a
Mhm.
problem. Um, if,
Yes.
if if the screening tools that you're using are culturally insensitive, if
Mhm.
they are not translated into the languages that your system represents, it's a problem. So I think there's a huge it cannot be a separate thing. It needs to be the case that equity is driving our implementation of social emotional learning and mental health services.
That's wonderful. John, any last words or inspirational message to teachers and school leaders on the issues of social emotional learning needs and the school mental health of our students?
I guess I'll say, it's a callback to something I said earlier,
Mhm.
which is really that when we talk about mental health services for kids, when we talk about building their social emotional learning skills, it is the thing that is going to drive all of the other outcomes. When we care about academic outcomes, we care about MCAS, great.
Mhm. Mhm.
Invest in social emotional learning and mental health, because that will directly impact those academic outcomes. If you care about post secondary matriculation rates, great. I care about that too. Invest in social emotional learning and mental health, because that directly impacts students' ability to matriculate to 2-year and 4-year institutions. Literally every outcome that we care about as a school, as a society, is mediated by mental health, is mediated by our social emotional skills. So if we want our kids to be ready for life after high school, if we want our kids to be ready for life, we have to invest in better metrics than simply academic outcomes and post-secondary outcomes. Those matter tremendously. They also are directly mediated by social emotional learning and mental health. So I care about those things too. I also care about making sure that we're investing in the things that are foundational for our kids, that will allow for all of those other things to happen. And that's mental health and social emotional learning.
Oh my gosh, I love it. Invest in SEL skills and youth mental health. Thank you,
Absolutely.
John. And so, if the folks, teachers, school leaders would like to get in touch with you and really learn more from you about best practices and really developing comprehensive school mental health support systems and SEL, where can they get in touch with you? And where can
Yeah.
they find you?
Yeah, absolutely. You can reach out to me through my Methuen email, jncrocker@methuen.k12.ma.us. If we can pop that in the chat for people to see, that'd be great too. And please also take a peek at our consortium webpage masmhc.org. That's the Massachusetts School Mental Health Consortium's landing page. You can learn a little bit about how to get involved and the opportunities to get professional development, coaching, training, lots of resources available. You can reach out through LinkedIn, and very happy to chat with anyone about these topics. I want to send a huge thank you to you, Alpha, for inviting me on the show, and just so impressed with the work that you're doing in your district. Thank you for the opportunity, and say hi to Kim for me too.
I will. Thank you, John. Thank you for your continued support to our school districts. I know that Kim works alongside with you. You provide all the mentoring, and we are just grateful for having you in supporting all of our initiatives when it comes to SEL and the youth school mental health. Your work is amazing. And I want to thank you for not just the impact that you actually bring to school leaders, but the entire Commonwealth of Massachusetts, and maybe the entire US, and who knows, maybe globally, John. We need people like you to really continue to talk about investment on SEL and the school mental health. So continue what you're doing. And as I say to all my guests, may you be blessed more. May you continue to have the strength to continue this work that you are doing.
Thank you so much, Alpha. I really appreciate it. I hope you have a wonderful day.
I will, and you too, John. Thanks
Take good
again.
care.
Thanks. And folks who are with us, we want to thank you for being with us for this wonderful hour with Mr. John Crocker. I hope that you were able to learn a lot when it comes to the social emotional learning needs of our students and supporting their mental health. All right, folks, this is it for now. I will see you next time. Thank you. Bye for now.